People who grew up with strict parents, what was their most unreasonable rule? Story 1. I had a friend who wasn't allowed to sit on the couch, no matter the circumstances. That was the first time I realized something was really wrong in his house. The kicker, it was a crappy couch, so it's not like he was going to ruin it. To the folks looking for logic, you'll find none. No, the parents weren't saving the couch for company. No, the kids didn't have a history of damaging the couch. No, the kids weren't little troublemakers. They were surprisingly well-behaved teens. Surprising because of how they were raised. This is about control, not logic. Domestic abuse is always about exerting control. Don't let anyone try to convince you otherwise. Even after adding a note about child abuse, I'm still getting jokes about how my friend must be a dog. Thanks, Reddit. Story 2. My mom was insanely controlling about food. Weird rules were in place like 1 slice of lunch meat per sandwich. No one but her was allowed to cook. She'd make 1 giant batch of spaghetti or something and we'd have leftovers for days, so she only had to make dinner twice a week. She did not work or anything, just didn't like cooking every day. Breakfast was cold cereal and you'd only be allowed a small bowl with just enough milk to moisten it. Occasionally, she'd bake something she called corn toasties, which was simply cornbread baked in a sheet pan. She'd cut them into squares and fill the freezer with them, and we could have one of those for breakfast as an alternative. Once when I was 14, I bought a pack of hot dogs at the store, snuck them home, and lit the grill. I was almost done cooking them when she came out screaming about fire hazards and swatted the plate out of my hand. She'd been making spaghetti. What an ungrateful little bastard I was. So then she ordered a pizza for the rest of my family, wraps individual servings of spaghetti in freezer paper, and puts them away. She tells me that I will be eating nothing else until it's all gone. Took about 2 months to choke it all down. Went without eating for a lot of days. I was also grounded for over a year. But I sure learned a lot about consequences. Story 3. My father was very, very strict. I wasn't allowed to have alone time with my mother. He beat the shit out of me constantly. But the oddest thing that still bugs me to this day is that he would burn all my things as punishment. And I get it, seeing my toys and valuables burning sucked and I probably learned some lessons. But he not only burned toys, but he would also burn everything. Every year or so for school, we would go to Meijer and buy new school clothes and shoes. He would also burn those, like some days after he bought them. At 8 years old, I remember thinking, you now have to buy me more clothes. But that wasn't the point, I suppose. He once took me to the Palace of Auburn Hills in Detroit to see the Globetrotters one year, and during the night he bought me a Globetrotters basketball and jersey. We had a fun night. The very next day I had left something on the floor in my room, and his punishment, among other things, was to burn the basketball and jersey he bought for like $150 less than 24 hours earlier. It just never made sense to me. My friends would joke about it all throughout middle and high school. Story 4. We couldn't go sledding during the winter, or any other season obviously, because my mom was a neat freak and didn't want snow slodged into the garage. So no snow playing of any kind, really. Never built a snowman, did go sledding when I was an adult. It's pretty great. All of the clothes in our closet had to be arranged by color, descending in order by shade. So for example, midnight blue at one end of the blue section and tar heel blue at the other. There was a system in place for colors too. So if the yellows were by the purple, for example, there'd be hell to pay. No shoes are on in the house under any circumstances. It was super uncomfortable when my brother's friend, who had prosthetic legs and always had shoes on, came over and didn't take his shoes off. Mom got really mad and confronted him. No Legos or puzzles are allowed, as they make messes and look like disorder. I f***ing love puzzles as an adult, one of my favorite hobbies. Story 5. I was from a large family and discipline was very strict. If I or one of my siblings broke one of the major rules, my parents would hold a truth session. All of the children would be brought to my dad's study where the guilty party would be given an opportunity to confess. If nobody came forward, we would be hit in turn in order of ascending age. The eldest 4 were hit with a sewer rod while, in deference to their age, the youngest ones would get a whack of a bamboo stick. A sewer rod is basically a 4-foot-long flexible rubber rod, around an inch thick and with a metal cap. It would leave the most remarkable welts. Horrendous things, really. Anyway, this would continue until someone admitted their guilt. At that point, they would receive the blows that everyone else had received to that point. So that was awful. I fully acknowledge that. I'm under no illusions. However, that wasn't the actual unreasonableness. No, the unreasonable part was that the person who caused the truth session didn't always receive the accrued punishment owed for having their siblings beaten. Sometimes they could just be let go, making their siblings hate them for causing pain to them. There'd be no explanation. The study door would be opened and we'd all be told to leave. That meant you could be rewarded for holding out and avoiding the punishment you'd definitely get if you admitted it at the beginning. My parents now tell fun stories about how when I was a child and I'd done something wrong, I'd always begin with, "Let me tell you my story. Haha." They chortle at my childish phrasing while I recall the terror that such an approach was meant to stave off. Story 6. Was only allowed 45 minutes of computer time daily. If anything happened to the computer, it was the video game's fault, not the shady links my mom still clicks on 14 years later. I can understand where my parents were coming from. I'm originally from Poland, which, as a lot of people know, was a communist country for a while. Everything was heavily regulated for quite some time. Even after '91, the practices were still common up until 2003, at least in the area I'm from, so I got a chance to experience mild communism, though I was a bit young to grasp politics. Coming to the US, they felt they had to regulate everything in the household, just because that's how it was since they were born. Since then, they've really cut back, and for most part, they're pretty relaxed about everything, though I feel like I got the short end of the stick. Growing up, I wasn't allowed to hang out outside of school, even during high school. And in high school, I wasn't allowed to date, so my social experience was pretty pathetic, to say the least. After graduating, my parents saw no real threat from letting people hang out or date, so my brother got a smooth ride through high school. It's better now, although I still have issues meeting new people. I've kept a small circle of 2 to 3 friends that I talk to, but hopefully that changes next year if I move to NYC for school. At least I still have RuneScape. Story 7. I have a ton. One was that I had to always give 24 hours notice if I wasn't going to be home for dinner any night of the week, because dinner plans are never made the day of. This lasted until I moved out when I was 19. I thought that would get better, but it actually became worse. My sister and I go to dinner with our parents every Sunday, and now they need 72 hours notice if we're not going to be there. Also had a 10 p.m. curfew every day of the week until I moved out. Sleeping in was never a thing. 9 a.m. wake-up call otherwise. Parents had sensors on our door so they could tell if we left our rooms at night. Cameras cover every inch of the outside. We weren't allowed to use the bathrooms after midnight. My stepmother came storming out of her room one night when I went to the bathroom at 2:30 a.m. because, sometimes you wake up and need to go, and I was sick of peeing in a bottle because of their rule. She stormed out and confronted me and looked like she was about to hit me. I said, "I dare you," as I was ready to hit her back. Story 8. When I think back on it, there weren't really any unreasonable standing rules. More like every now and then my parents would explode on something minor to make up for the lack of parenting. I love my parents, but they don't seem to get the idea that not being around much f***ed their kids up a bit. I was extremely shy and withdrawn, and my brother is a narcissist. I would take quite a few paragraphs to explain, but suffice it to say their lack of checks and balances on him, and my family's doting on him legitimized his belief that everything revolves around him. On the other hand, nobody paid attention to me, which is partially on me. I'm quite happy to fade into the background in any situation. I hate attention. Maybe because I didn't get any when I was young, and when I did, it felt weird. I don't really know. But yeah, I specifically remember the few times when my dad was shouting in anger at me, and neither made any sense. Once he told us, during the middle of summer, when we were about 13 and 15, not to go outside while he was out. Mind you, we were 13 and 15. Literally every single day during the summer, no one was home, and we were outside unsupervised all f***ing day. So my brother was like, "Rules don't apply to me," and goes outside. Dad came home, starts screaming at him, then starts getting pissed at me and whacks me for not stopping him. That time, the dude was like twice my size, and no one could tell him shit. So, another time on my birthday, all I wanted was a remote-controlled car, so I got one. Brother proceeds to take it out while I'm not there. Dumbass tries to control it and ride a bike at the same time, run it over, and breaks it. Puts it back and doesn't tell anyone. I find it, get pissed. Dad, of course, thinks I'm lying to cover my own ass, and I get whacked a bit. Brother thought it was funny. Instead of parenting, Dad went the easy route. Assigned blame and punishment, went back to doing whatever the hell he was doing. Fast forward 20 plus years. My brother is rapidly heading for a divorce that he just can't believe is his fault. Haven't said a word to him in maybe 3 years. Honestly, lost track. I can't talk to him because he'll blame random bad shit that happened to him on something I or my best friend did like 25 years ago. Dad is disabled, lays around all day, and can't understand why no one comes to visit. Mom, love her to death, but she's an idiot. Makes excuses for both of them. I used to idolize my father and I glossed over a lot. Been thinking a lot about him lately and coming to terms with the fact that he's an ass, much like my brother, which sucks, but the truth is the best policy. Story 9. I was interested in learning about Wicca because I was young and in high school, early 2000s, when Harry Potter was still happening and all that stuff. My mom and stepdad found out by reading an email I sent to my cousin. It was the summer and they freaked out, took everything. I couldn't read, I couldn't listen to music. I couldn't watch TV or movies with the family. I couldn't hang out with friends, couldn't talk to my cousin anymore. Basically anything that might bring me pleasure was taken. They made me do chores all day and would go on family outings without me. Soon I became a shell of a person. I was going to kill myself. I wanted to, I just was scared of death, so I decided to not go through with it, so I turned myself off. They hated it. They weren't getting a raise out of me anymore. Anything they said to me to extend my sense, I wouldn't react to. Since their narcissism relied on a victim, I wasn't a source anymore. So they extended my grounding even further. They could have told me to go pick up dog shit in the backyard with my teeth and I wouldn't have flinched. My stepdad's family, just as terrible, would come over and belittle me as well. I was told to smile, so I'd humor them and flash an empty smile for a second and return to the blank expression I had to find solace in. All this to save me from going to hell. The only thing that saved me that summer was my visitation with my dad. My mom and stepdad tried to paint him in a bad light like he was the one. Even as a kid, I knew my dad didn't make me feel as bad and empty as they did. I eventually got through it. Years later, about 4 years ago now, I ended up working at a job, unexpectedly, with a girl I used to play with in the neighborhood. I always wondered why she stopped showing up. When I wasn't home or in another part of the house, she came to the door and asked to play. One of my parents opened the door and told her I didn't want to play with her anymore. I always wondered why she never hung out with me or talked to me. Even finding this out in a more recent term, I cried and apologized to her. I could have had a great friendship with a lot of people, but they just wanted to alienate and control me. Unfortunately, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I don't talk to them anymore, but I still live in the same city as them and I have a lot of social anxiety because of that. One of my roommates exhibits some of the behavior my parents were so kind as to bestow on me. It's making things difficult to handle. I just want people to be happy and live in a healthy environment. It's so fucked up that the biggest monsters in the world are the people closest to you. Story 10. No lying seems reasonable, maybe, but it's not. It wasn't about the rules. It was about the constant interrogations. There weren't so many rules, as there was her personality and the things that bugged her, and the fact that she was going to interrogate the absolute shit out of us every single day. It's the complete lack of privacy and the total suspicion that makes living with this kind of parent the worst. Not even the widest of lies or the tiniest of omissions were acceptable. Where were you? Why? When did you get there? When did you leave? Who else was there? What did you do? Why did you do this? And did so-and-so do that? Why did you let them? And how is that related to this other thing? Why did you just lie to me? It's hard to explain, maybe, but there was this Socratic lawyer-type method being applied constantly to invent lies to catch you in, like she was looking for an excuse to backhand you, digging in until our memories failed to provide total consistency. Then she could ground us or whatever. If she was in a bad mood, she'd scowl around the house until she found something out of place so she could scream at us. Screaming. Lots of screaming. For strict parents, it's often not really about the rules. It's about respect, which is a dog whistle for total domination of the subordinates in the house. If there were rules, there would be times when I was allowed to do what I was doing without suspicion. This did not exist. Every single day on my way home from anywhere, I had to prepare a huge list of answers and try to find where she would dig in and build up the walls. Keep stories simple, build big emotional walls. It mostly didn't work. We didn't really have a relationship. We didn't talk about my feelings. Maybe try imagining if every day you had to cross the border twice and board a flight, but the border agents are all your mom. Story 11. I don't know where to start. My mom was super chill. Whatever I was going to do was fine. When I went to my dad's place, totally different story. I'm not diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure I'm on the dyslexia spectrum somewhere. I'm 34 and still say right when I mean left. I'm also a professional electrical engineer and still don't have the multiplication tables memorized. Pretty much proof, if you ask me. Anyway, in grade school, I was struggling with the tables in math class, and my dad sat down and wrote out a bunch of multiplication problems in a notebook and had me sit at the table and work them out. When I started struggling, he became visibly and audibly agitated, which my brother and I knew was basically a death sentence. Anyway, after shouting, "What is 7 times 8?" at me a handful of times, he backhanded my face so hard that it spiked off the table, leaving imprints of Harley-Davidson rings on my right face and spiral notebook lines on my left. For scale, I had personally witnessed my beast of a father bench press 400 pounds. Another time was when he asked me to lay a shirt over a chair to avoid it wrinkling. He closed his fist and blasted me in the back of the skull for doing it wrong. It could go on and on. The rule was that you must always perform to his standard, which was impossibly high for a 9-year-old and unstated before you begin a task. Shortly after my 10th birthday, he got pissed about custody and kicked my mom's door in and shot her twice before killing himself. He didn't care that I was watching or what would happen to me after he orphaned me. Listening through these stories, a lot of these are clear-cut cases of child abuse. For those people, you should know that your parents are fucked up. Don't blame yourself for the bullshit they pulled. I hope that you are all living the lives you want now and doing what you want when you want. For those still under their parents' thumb, just ride it out. It will get better. Story 12. My mother is a hardcore narcissist. There was a ton of stuff. I had to literally whisper responses to her when we were talking because my regular indoor voice is an attitude that got me in trouble. I wasn't allowed to do chores. I literally begged to let me do the laundry or cook as a child because I knew I'd be hurt later in life if I didn't. I'm 20 and still have yet to be allowed to do anything other than take out a garbage bag. I got in a lot of trouble a few months ago for making scrambled eggs. I wasn't allowed to work during school. Even now that I'm older, she would actively try to sabotage me by applying for the same exact position so that I wouldn't get the job. I'm still not allowed to drive. I have my learners only because I had to get them for school. They expire in 2 months. I've been behind the wheel of a car once in my life. Growing up, I was never allowed to go to anyone's house. Unless they came over to my house, I would never see anyone outside of school. Sleepovers weren't allowed. I went to a single birthday party in school, and I recently came to the realization that I was probably invited to more as a child that my mother never told me about. I'm not allowed to show any emotion. If I show visible signs of frustration, I get in trouble for having an attitude. If I'm happy, I get yelled at that it doesn't matter. If I'm sad, I get told to get over it because men aren't sad. I was allowed to date, however, only people of my race. If someone's grandparents were of a different race or anything, I wasn't allowed to even really interact with them. I wasn't allowed to go outside as a kid. Literally, other than go to school, I never went outside to play. I have no memories of ever doing anything active as a child. I bought video games and TV for my room at a young age solely so that I wouldn't try to go outside and play. Honestly, there's probably a lot more. These are just the first things to actually pop to mind. Story 13. I had an insane stepmom who was very controlling and vindictive. Really weird rules. So when I moved in with them in middle school, I had a 10 p.m. bedtime. If I woke up at 2 or 3 in the morning and went to the bathroom, she'd run into the room because I broke her rule and start screaming at me and hitting me. Then she'd go and take my CD player and books from my room, so I had to stay in there with nothing. Not allowed to leave my bed when I would be at home for a week after the incident, or she'd beat me up. I was 11. I ended up taking the screen out my window and just pissing out the window at night. Stopped eating before bed so I wouldn't need to go number 2. If I disagreed with her or asked a question, she would always make me recite, "A wife comes first in a marriage, you are second." She was also crazy about the bus and me taking that to school. There was a bear one time, literally maybe 80 to 100 yards from the end of our driveway. So I told her to drive me to school. I'm not standing out there for the bus. Basically got punched in the mouth and told to go stand out there and not worry about the bear. I didn't, and that was a huge fight. Note, that stopped real quick. When I turned 14, I went from 80 pounds to about 145 pounds and started wrestling. She hit me in the face with a wooden rod hard for using the bathroom in the middle of the night. Blindsided me as I was walking out. I hip-tossed her hard across the room and mushed her face and stepped hard on her chest, pinned her down and told her very firmly, "You're not strict," her term. "You are controlling and a bully who has nothing going on in her life. Stay at home and do nothing but TV all day. Never touch me again." The funny thing is, after that, for like 3 or 4 years, she became really cool. Story 14. Not allowed a key until I was 18. Or was it 16? Can't remember. Yet nobody would be home once I got back from school, so I would spend a lot of time hanging around outside. I would usually be expected to be waiting outside, though sometimes it was forgotten this was a rule, so I would go to the local library. Even once I was given a key, I wasn't allowed to stay home alone and had to vacate if they were. Once I lost my key. Turns out my cousin had it in his pocket, but he forgot. My stepdad said we would have to change the locks as someone might find them and rob the house. And when my mom got home, she demanded I go and look for the keys again. I refused, as I'd spent hours looking and knew I wouldn't be able to find them. She then demanded my phone, so I refused and sat on it. So then she gave me a long, hard look, picked up a book of trinkets in my bookcase, and turned it over while staring at me. After I didn't react, she trashed more stuff in my room until I started to scream and shout at her, swearing. I didn't usually swear at her, but the years of abandonment I would burst into anger when she started on me, asking her what was wrong with her. While I screamed at her, she stopped and laughed at me incredulously, asking me in a calm voice what was wrong with me. Then she said in a low, threatening voice, "Find your keys," and left. So yeah, not the only ridiculous rule they had, but it's one that sticks out the most. Also, my bag was searched every morning before school, and I wasn't allowed to wear short puffer jackets or jackets without arms.